Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome out to tonight's free tax sale investing workshop. I'm Ferre, and I'm here with Stephen Swenson. This has become kind of a traditional thing that we do every couple months, where we hold these free workshops or trainings for people to attend.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we try to talk about different topics each time, and today we're going to talk about how we approach auctions and also avoid risk.
Yeah. In fact, and it's going to be based on really, I guess, experiences we've had even just recently. Anytime you decide you're going to, participate in an auction, there's a lot of preparation that goes into it, especially if it's an auction that you are traveling to, specifically. If it's a live sale, but any auction you're going to participate in, you're going to have to do preparations for. And going into that, we're going to talk about a sale that we attended about 1 month ago.
Yeah.
And so when we're looking at auctions, one of the things that we look at, or some of the things we consider going into it, are is it an on-site auction? Is it an online auction? That could really affect how we approach even the types of properties we might go after and how much we'll pay. That's kind of a big factor. Also the size of the list, of the sale.
Yeah. Well, and that can make a big difference, based on that size of the list. For this particular sale, we really had a massive list. Especially if we're talking about tax deed auctions. Now, with tax lien auctions, they can have tens of thousands of tax liens, but usually those are going to be online systems now. They're pretty easy to use to narrow down the price range and the type of liens that you'd like to buy. But when we're looking at a tax deed list, especially one like this, they really just provided us with a PDF type file that had the list on it. And so at that point, what we really needed to do was to actually change it over to an Excel file, because we knew with this type of a list, we wanted to put it online using Google Docs, because not only were me and Shade attending the auction, but we were also taking some of our coaching students with us.
Yeah. And so that's one of the first things, if the list is small, then it's not as important, although we still want some kind of file, where we can copy and edit and change information about specific properties on the list.
Yeah.
So if it's a small list, though, we still want that, but if it's a big list, then we have to have it in some kind of format that we can edit and change, so that's one of the steps we're going to go through. Beyond that, we're also need to be mindful about whether a deposit's going to be required for the auction, or how the county's going to handle payment. In this case, I don't know if the county required a deposit, but it was a good idea to put one in.
Yeah, well, what really was important was getting pre-registered. And the reason is because this particular auction was very crowded. And so the day of the sale, there was a line, going back, hundreds and hundreds of feet, with people that needed to register for the sale. And so because we had already pre-registered, we were able to go to a shorter line, get our information quicker. Also, when it comes to online auctions in particular, you are probably going to need to re-register beforehand and put in some kind of deposit. So with live auctions, they may not require a deposit, because really what they're going to do is they're going to require, a payment either at as soon as you purchase the property or at the end of the sale. And so they may or may not require a deposit. But if it's any type of online auction, they're most likely going to require something.
Yeah. And going into it, at the very least, you needed to know, how the county handled payment, because if you went into it not having that stuff lined up ahead of time, you didn't have time to line it up once you were there.
Yeah, because they required you to have, essentially pay for these properties directly after you won the property. So once we bought the property here at this Tulsa, Oklahoma sale, we had to go up and pay for it right then if we didn't have a deposit already placed.
Yeah. So prior to the day of the sale, a couple of weeks before the auction was scheduled to take place, we were able to download the list And what we did, like Steve said, it was in PDF format, but we needed it in a format, and it was such a big list that we actually needed it in kind of an Excel format so we could look at information quickly.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of what we did. That was kind of the first steps that we took before the auction here. And we want to go through kind of the process that we go through, as we begin to conduct pre-auction research and, and kind of what we do and who we focus on.
Yeah, well, and one thing about those Excel lists is it allowed us to put links directly back to the Google map or any type of Zillow information or county record information or, links back to photos of the properties that we took as we drove by and looked at properties. So it really was a resource that we could not only use before the auction, but even during the auction, we were pulling this up and going, down the list as they were offering off the property.
Yeah. In fact, we're gonna show the list again and talk about it again, later on. The list that was provided by the county was pretty sparse on information, and what we want is to be able to add anything that if we're going to spend time looking at any of these properties, we don't want that time to be wasted. We want to be able to record the information. And in a way so that we don't have to do it again, and so that anybody that's accessing the same list can do the same thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what we kind of go through and what we focus on when we're doing pre-auction research. The areas that we focus on, and and kind of the I guess what you have to complete.
Yeah, I mean, this is just kind of the most basic stuff, that we're going to go through, being the treasure records to determine your market value, these 4 things. But this is how we're going to determine if this is an investment that we want to pursue or not.
Yeah, we always start off with with some of the basic records here, on the property. Of course, the treasurer or tax collector is usually our first place we're going to end up going to get the list in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Here, the auction was handled by the treasurer. And so this is where we went to get the tax sale list to find out about any, rules, dates, anything like that. This is where we went to essentially get that information. And now once we got that information, that's really where we're going to start researching the tax sale list within the assessor's office.
Yeah. So once we had the list, we can go to the assessor section here, or in some cases it can be the appraiser. Here was the assessor, and we use the assessor's tools here to pull up the property records associated with each one of the properties that were coming up for auction. And that's because the assessor is usually the main hub for property records within the county. And so if you go to the assessor's records, you're usually going to find a record search tool there that'll allow you to to locate properties according to parcel number or other search features.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what you can see there is that we were able to type in the parcel number and essentially look up the property records. And so when we pull up the property records, we really have a lot of information that we can view here. We have the address, we have the market value, the owner information, but it also gets into a lot of other information like sales information.
Yeah, and it is really a lot to that's kind of jammed into a small area there. When you pull up a property record like this, and a lot of really handy information, which is part of the reason why we'll oftentimes record all of it. Into a file somewhere, if we're looking up information on the properties. At least as we start getting more serious about them, we'll keep this information handy, because we can tell everything from, whether there are improvements on the property, what the improvements are valued at historically, what it's sold for, and in this case, even images of the property over time.
Yeah, exactly. So once we've gone through that, we can at least determine, is this a property we want to research more into?
It also had we also have access there to additional maps and more or larger photos there of the property. So like I said, this was the most recent image that they had for this particular home. It was from 2017. So from an auction perspective, we know that the county has assigned a value to the property, that it has improvements, has a home on it. And we can see the most recent photo as of 2017, but it's not necessarily enough to go off of in terms of figuring out if you're going to bid on the property or not. Because for all we know, you know, I mean, it looks like everything there should be fine, but we need to do, you know, some kind of on-site evaluation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, this photo you can see is 2017, and we have somebody living there, or at least looks to be living there at the time. But you know, it's been 4 years from now, you know, and so a lot of things can happen over that time frame. Where just like Shade said, before we buy that property, we're going to get some type of current photos or doing an on-site evaluation.
Yeah. Now, as we find properties that we're interested in or that we start to dig into and we want to do more research on, you know, one of the things that we're going to start doing is using the county recorder's office for the clerk to locate additional records on the properties to help us identify some potential risks.
Yeah, exactly. And what we're going to do that is by using the recorder or the clerk's office, and really what whoever this person is within the county saves all of the records within the county. So this includes things like the property deeds. So if we need to look up the property deed, see if there's any easements or anything like that on it, to see past owners, we're going to be able to do that. They're also going to
Yeah,
save.
it's the same office that basically handles the transfer of deeds. So whenever a property gets transferred, they record it, they issue the new deed. They also do the same thing with mortgages and notes.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when we actually go to sell the property, this is the same department that we're going to be contacting to transfer the deed into the new buyer's name. But what's most important for us, I mean, things like mortgages, judgments, in most cases are going to get eliminated through the tax foreclosure process. But what we're really looking for is any other type of governmental lien. So, you know, here on right is an example of, you know, a lien is where we're looking up on a property where you can see there's some type of nuisance lien on this particular property. And this is really going to be the most common type of lien on tax sale properties.
Yeah. In fact, it's something that we always look for, you know, because it's one of the things that can still remain attached to the property even though it's been through a foreclosure. So in other words, you know, it's something that will still be required to be paid off, you know, even if you were to acquire the property. So you don't want to buy something like that on accident.
Well, in reading the information where we're able to pull up this lien, we can see that whenever this was done, now this is quite old, back in 2007, but there's notes there about what needed to be done, you know, debris, broken mower, filing cabinets, broken toilet, you know, they have all this information there, so we can at least get an idea of what was taking place on the property at that time.
Yeah. In fact, when we do research, you know, the records here on these properties, what we're oftentimes looking into is into the ownership. Actually, you know, when we're looking for record of past liens, the liens themselves are going to be attached to the owners that own the property at the time.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the reason that we're going to look up the deed and why finding that owner's information, owner's name, is so important within the county records, is because we're going to use that to research the owner's name to see if there's anything connected to him that could be connected to the property.
Yeah. So for example here, you know, we're looking under the owner's name, and you know, we can see that there are a number of different records that pull up as a result of that. We've got one of these, there's a deed, one's a mortgage. We can see, you know, a deed and another deed, and so we have to find the right deeds, and you know, this is also where we're going to find liens from cities, or government issued liens are also going to show up here.
Yeah, well, and it can give us a good history of the property because we can see when it's sold, pull up that deed, the actual deed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it's sold again, you know, you can see here, it looks like it's sold within a few months of each other, 6 months or so. And so, it sold 2 times in that year. You could look at both of those. And sometimes if there wasn't a full warranty deed, we may look at more than one owner's last name, or more than just the most recent owner within these record searches. So if one of these property owners quit claimed it to another person, we're probably going to look at both of those property owners up to see if there's anything connected, because between that quitclaim deed, there could still be things that stick to the property.
Yeah, well, nothing was recorded really in that time, so so anything could come up. We're generally going to go back to the last time it had a warranty deed because we know at that point it was clean.
Yeah, but really what we're looking for is some type of lien. And so here we can see the most common type in this case is going to be a lien from the city of Tulsa for most likely some type of nuisance lien, like the lien that we showed you just a few minutes ago.
Yeah. In fact, this is basically what the liens look like as we're going through, this record search tool and locating records related to that last name.
Yeah. So once we've got a good idea of what liens are on the property, and in fact, we should mention this, if we do find liens on the property, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to completely avoid the property. Some of these liens may be worth paying off, or maybe for small amounts. Also, we'll contact wherever that lien is from. So in this case, Tulsa City, and see if we can work out something with them if we end up buying the property, saying, hey, I'm looking to buy this property, but there's this lien on here. You guys willing to work a deal? In fact, in some areas, we've had cities actually eliminate the lien if the investor was willing to, essentially taking ownership and cleaning it up from that point.
Yeah. All right. So from there, the next thing that we need to do is we're looking at properties. So also, when we're looking at something like a lien, like Steve said, it's not going to necessarily kill the deal, but it's something we need to be aware of. And so we wanted to record stuff like that, and we started doing that. As we went through and researched properties, if we found there were liens there, then we would try to make some notes about the liens that were there. So it's something you can be aware of, so that you can, basically make it part of the deal.
Yeah. Now, the county records will show us the assessed value, but the assessed value, is not always going to be the same thing as the market value. In fact, usually there's some type of, discrepancy between the two.
Yeah, they're not usually going to be the same. What we need to find out is, realistically, what the property's value is, meaning if we put it on the market, what do we believe it can actually sell for? And the only way we can determine that is to try to find other properties in the area that have sold. We need to find comparable properties in order to determine, an accurate value.
Yeah, now for tax lien investing, just so you guys know, we really won't get into hard due diligence values. A lot of times if we're buying tax liens, for example, let's say in Florida, that assessed value is good enough for us to make a determination if we want to purchase that tax lien or not, just through the county records. But if we're talking about tax deed property, whether that be definitely homes, but even land, that's where we need to really find comparables of properties that have sold, properties that are currently for sale, and figure out how much the property is valued.
Yeah. Realistically, liens don't really require a whole lot of research, outside of a couple of different things you want to check for. But the vast majority redeem. That's kind of what they're designed to do. But with deeds, you're acquiring property, so you've got to know what the property value is, prior to buying. And you also need to know other things, like, for instance, how difficult is the property going to be to sell? What is the value compared to, what it's opening up at? You need to figure out what your maximum bid is going to be, and what, whether you've got, something that is a great deal or something that's just an okay deal. And the only way you can really determine that is through comps. That's how you're going to get an idea of also what is going on in the market in terms of, what's for sale.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as far as using or finding these comparables, we use a combination of Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com, and we even use, especially if it's available within the county, sometimes all of the counties record the sales that have been happening. And some counties have pretty good systems where you can find comparable properties, you can find recent sold properties using some of their online systems. And so for any of the counties that have that can be a real great tool to pull up, for example, land that is sold within the last year within this, within, some zip code.
Yeah, and one of the keys to doing comps is just making sure that you're comparing good apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So for instance, if we're looking at vacant land, if we're looking at lots, then we're going to find comparable lots, in the area that are as close in size and in type.
The neighborhood.
Neighborhood.
Style of neighborhood, everything.
We're going to look for similar types of properties, in their total square footage. If it's homes, then we want to find comparable homes that are as similar to the property and close, to the property as we can, so that we can determine, what they're, so we can basically find properties that have sold and determine, about what their dollar per square foot was.
Yeah, well, and because, when it comes to land, we usually, pay between 10 to 20 cents on the dollar. So you don't need to be as specific if you're paying 10, 12, 15 cents on the dollar for a building lot. But if we're talking about homes, that's where we really need to be specific, because as an investor, you can pick, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home that is valued a lot higher than maybe your comparable home. And what I mean by that is, I realized this as a realtor when I first got started in real estate, was that I could kind of do comps any way I wanted, because you can find comparables to justify it. And so that's the reason when Shade said, we're going to find the very best comparables, that means that in a lot of times with some of these homes, we're going to find, the bottom of the value homes. We're going to find, homes that need work, because chances are the properties that we're looking at need work.
Yeah. In fact, you always want to try to find the most accurate and honest comps, that are reflective, of your property, the property that you're offering. And so, looking at comps for these properties is the way that we're going to figure out roughly what the property is valued at. We're also going to know at that point, most likely, how we would go about selling it, whether this is a property that we're going to wholesale, whether this is a property, that we're going to sell for market value, with a warranty deed. Those are all things that we are figuring out as we're looking at the properties and as we're doing research on them.
Yeah. So, once we've gone through that, and really kind of as we're going through that, we're researching these county records for any type of risk. Really determine what is a good investment and what is a bad investment.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things about tax sale properties in general is there is a high percentage of risky properties. There's lots of risky properties in every tax sale list. There's properties that are just junk land. If you were to buy those properties, you're going to lose your money, because you're not going to be able to sell the property for anything. In other words, there are plenty of properties that the county is selling that you can't really sell.
Yeah, well, even in this in this Tulsa sale, I would say there was probably 30 to 40% of the properties where they needed serious rehab, and there was probably 20% that were full on demos, or should be demoed.
Yeah, there were a lot of properties that were had already been condemned.
Yeah, condemned.
They or had already been torn down, but on the property record, it might still look like there was improvements. Even though there's not.
Well, and there were some homes that hadn't been torn down yet, but had been condemned.
Yeah, there were demolition orders, that were out on them. They just hadn't. Or
definitely should be demolition orders, and in the process of demolition orders. And so, one thing that was interesting is, we'll talk about it here in a little bit, is just how many people at the auction didn't go through all of these important risks that we're talking about. And so because of it, there was a lot of people in that auction, hundreds of people lost or will lose money because of the way the auction played out and not really doing their research beforehand.
What's interesting though is that as we, the purpose here in doing this is to try to find or eliminate, those risks. And, so for instance, as we drove properties, and as we drove properties, we were running into other people that were driving properties too. We had plenty of hints that the tax sale was going to be big before, the first day, because we were running into traffic, on the properties we were looking at.
Yeah. So let's talk about the major tax sale risk that we were looking for as we started researching and going through these properties and determining which ones we were going to bid on.
Yeah. In fact, the main risks that we were looking out for would be, government liens, easements, useless land, which is always a risk, but also, equally risky are, the condemned structures or major rehabs. And then also, a risk with all auctions, I think, but especially live auctions, is emotional bidding.
Yeah. So the first one being governmental liens. Like we mentioned, the foreclosure process in most states is going to eliminate any type of judgments, mortgages, even in most cases HOAs, anything like that. But what can stick is any type of federal, state, or city lien.
Yeah, and because these properties have been, because they've gone through this tax sale process, in a lot of cases they've been neglected. So it also makes them more vulnerable to things like nuisance liens, that they're going to get against it. So grass cutting liens are very common, which some places will call them nuisance liens. Eventually, if a place doesn't get cut and it's been cut before, if it's within city limits, they're going to require it, to be cut, and so they'll start sending people out. And as liens, are issued against the property, we need to watch out for those, because, some liens can be for small amounts, but over time they're constantly accruing penalties, and so they're just getting bigger, and bigger over time.
Yeah. So, these liens are going to be recorded within the clerk's office, the recorder's office, and that's where we went through and kind of showed you guys how we researched them. The second risk is going to be an easement. And an easement is just a right of way giving individuals or other owners permission to use a property for a specific purpose.
Yeah, in fact, easements are a little bit tricky because they don't necessarily disqualify a property from being a good property. There are plenty of great properties that have lots of easements on them, but they can definitely be something we want to watch out for, though, because they're a major risk. There are lots of properties in tax sale lists that have easements or are really nothing but easements. So they can take a property from being useful to being something that really has no use and can't be sold for anything.
Yeah. In fact, if you see a property that has something like a power station or a cell tower or oil pump or something like that, do not assume that by buying that property, you now have the right to whatever utility was there, because 99% of the time you won't.
Yeah, in fact, if there's any kind of existing equipment there, especially if it's anything that's in use, then it's certainly there and being used through some type of an easement.
Yeah. So as far as safe easement, this could be a neighbor road access. So a lot of times there'll be a road to a property that will go through another property, and they've allowed an easement there to go through that property. So you allow them to drive on the road that goes through the corner of your lot to get to their lot.
Yeah. In fact, anytime that the government needs to use the property for anything, like for instance, underground lines are something that properties will have easements for, but they won't necessarily, they don't really affect the property in a lot of ways, but they will affect it in some ways. For instance, they could affect where you can dig, where you won't be able to dig.
Well, that's part of the reason why they, the city always has you call before you dig, is because there very well could be under, some type of lines, power lines under the property that you can go ahead and cut off. And so that's part of the reason they do that, is because that's a pretty common easement. But the risky kind of easements are things that, like we kind of talked about, a really common one will be a water basin or drainage ditches or something like that, where they've set that up, as a place to retain water, to keep from flooding.
Yeah, a lot of times, it's kind of based on where properties are located. Some properties like that are, as a result of where they're at, they're really nothing but easements. They where drainage or something like that, you can't do anything with that. The same is true of cell towers, power stations.
Utility type station, anything like that.
Yeah, is something that we've got to, or basically that is going to take away any real use from the property. And so, what we're looking for a lot of times easements, there's a couple of different ways that we can identify easements. One is just visually, as we're looking at properties, we can identify things that show us signs of easements. But at the same time, though, we can only identify certain things, visually. In order to really know what the easements on the property are, we need to do a number of things. So, like for instance, locate the property deed.
Yeah, well, and with the safe easements, those aren't things that we're going to look into. So if we're looking at a single family home, we're not going to look into, is there some sort of easement on, a power line going through it or something like that. But if the property looks suspicious, if it looks like a drainage ditch, water basin, any type of power stations or energy stations, cell towers, we saw some there that had, in Oklahoma, that had a pump on it, like an oil pump type thing,
Yeah.
And even in a situation like that, I'm almost positive you're not going to get those mineral rights. There's some type of easement there. So even if you bought that property, you really can't do anything because there's some type of easement there on it. So, if the property looks suspicious, that's where we're really going to look into it. And in fact, some of the properties we'll just be able to eliminate without doing any more research than just looking at the GSI map, property records, and we can determine, hey, we don't need to look into this anymore. This is a water basin for runoff within this neighborhood.
Well, and also a telltale sign is if there is something there on the property, if it doesn't show improvement value, so, in other words, if there's something on the property, it should show a certain amount of value, in the improvements. It should be something that the county has, that they've accounted for. And if you don't see it in the county record for, and that it's located on the property, then that's a sign that it's not being assigned that value, to the property.
Yeah, and these kind of easements are going to be more common with land than something like a single family home.
Yeah, definitely.
That kind of gets us into risk 3, which is useless land. This is probably one of the number one, risk associated with buying tax sale property. And part of that is because land is usually, the most abundant thing on tax sale list.
Yeah, well, it's very easy for land, to be foreclosed on and, to end up in the tax sale. It doesn't take that many years in most cases. And land's different from homes, and other properties that can be lost. If somebody loses a home, people are being displaced. There's a lot of people that are contacted in that process. When before the foreclosure process were to even begin, there would be other notifications, I'm sure, that would be coming out with the home. Things like lots of bills that are associated with, usually homes have mortgages and a lot more parties that are involved. But with a piece of land, you can just have a single owner. And the issue with that is that, if there's only a single owner listed on the property and they own it outright, then when the foreclosure process happens, really there's only going to be one notice that goes out.
Yeah.
And that's going to be all the notification that there really is.
Yeah. Well, and when it comes to useless land, it's pretty easy to, especially as you get going, to determine which properties are useful and which ones aren't. Really what we're looking for is property, and we always say this to our members, students, that we're looking for property that has both use and value. And what we mean by use is that it can be used for something. If it's a building lot, it can be used to build on it. It's large enough that, within the zoning to be able to build a home on it. Otherwise it's not going to have a whole lot of use. I mean, yeah, somebody might be able to use that property if, let's say it's, 1,000 feet smaller than it needs to be to build a home. Yes, somebody might be able to use that property, but we can't just sell it to anyone. It limits who we can sell it to. And so we're going to use the county records. We use a lot of GSI maps and even plat maps, anything like that. We'll use the maps to determine if the property is usable or not.
Yeah, well, that's because a big part of useless land is about where it's located at and its size and shape. You know, as if you can determine those things, you know, where a property is located at, you know, how big it is, you can get a pretty good idea if the property has use or not. You know, in fact, a lot of times useless land will kind of stick out. You know, you'll come across it, it'll be something like a drainage ditch, or you know, you'll be able to tell because it's obviously landlocked, you know, or it's a side lot, you know, which there are a ton of side lots in tax sale lists. You know, they, you know, somebody gets tired of paying property taxes on something that doesn't have any inherent value to them, you know, that they can't, you know, it's not like they're really going to be able to sell it. And even if they, you know, if they don't have to worry because there's not really anything anybody else can use it for.
Yeah, well, something like landlocked property can be kind of tempting if it's the right one, because sometimes you'll see, you know, a really good property that has a lot of value, you know, within a good area, but it's completely landlocked. And so, you know, really by buying that property, you limit who you can sell it to just to those surrounding neighbors. You know, there's not a chance, you know, probably not a good chance that you're going to be able to sell that outside of that. Now, you know, on some property in more rural areas, you may be able to contact some of the surrounding neighboring property owners and see if they'd be willing to put an easement or something like that on their property so that you could access it. And then it may be a situation. But, you know, usually we're going to always avoid landlocked property, even if it does look like a decent property.
Yeah.
You can't get to it, you know, you're not going to really be able to sell it.
Yeah, you know, for instance, most communities, you know, they are planned out, they have their roads going through them. And one of the things, you know, that you may not realize is that even the roads themselves are ultimately a piece of property that are going to be owned by somebody. You know, but they can't be used for anything else really, you know, except for these roads. And so the roads can oftentimes end up in, you know, on the tax sale list because they effectively can't be used for anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we saw people bidding huge amounts on roads.
Yeah,
at the tax sale.
And everything. You know, side lots, that's one you're going to find a lot where the property isn't big enough to be built on. And that's part of the reason we'll always go to the city and find out how big, you know, how big a lot do we need to be able to build within the city limits or county limits or wherever it's
Yeah,
at.
they usually have a square foot, you know, minimum, or, you know, or be able to tell
Or
you
size,
dimensions. Yeah,
dimensions.
yeah, you know, has to be at least, you know, this dimension by this dimension. You know, something else that can make land useless though are other factors like water. You know, swamp, wetlands area, you know, those are properties, you know, we want to avoid. You know, one of the indications too that you can always look at is the value. You know, a lot of times useless land, you know, the county knows that it's useless, and so they assign a fairly low value to it.
Yeah, now as we're looking at property to see if it is buildable, we'll use comparable properties there on the GSI map. So we'll look at the neighboring properties. Does it look the same as other properties? But, you know, unless we're sure if it is a smaller type lot, even if we're going to usually contact that city to find out how much that is, because sometimes the city will, you know, change the amount, change the dimensions that they allow, you know, so instead of doing, you know, 1/12 an acre, you know, a point 12 an acre, now it needs to be a 1/4 acre.
Yeah, yeah. In other words, you know, cities can change what the minimum requirements are over time, and if they make that bigger than what it used to be, then all of these lots that were, you know, that were subdivided, you know, in smaller sizes, they're suddenly not, you know, they're not big enough for any intended use. You have to get more than one lot, you know, in order to make it usable.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the you know, the zoning and you know, the use of the property and making sure that it's usable is a big factor that we look at whenever we're looking at vacant land. If we're looking at improved properties, you know, properties that have a structure, this is actually one of the images that we took while we were out there. That's one of the properties that was on the tax sale list.
Man.
Listed as, and they were still assigning some kind of improvement value to it, even though you can tell that it's just junk.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and somebody was probably bidding on it based off what they could see on Google Maps, or Google,
old
Street
images.
View.
Yeah, probably old
Or
images.
county, or the county's last picture.
Yeah.
Which a lot of times will be completely wrong to the condition of it is now. And so that brings up risk number 4, and that's any type of condemned major rehab. This is really our biggest risk with structured property. And you got to think, for these properties are being lost because of back taxes. So yes, there's good properties that go through the cracks from people passing away, moving, whatever it is. But there's also a lot of these properties that are being neglected, let go for taxes for a reason, just like this one.
Yeah. This property obviously, it suffered from a fire.
Yeah. What's it going to be better for the owner to do? Have to spend 20 grand to try to, take everything down and demolish it and clear the lot, or just not pay the property taxes, let it go to the government. Some, poor sap ends up buying it, and now it's his problem or her problem.
Yeah. There are always weird circumstances surrounding how properties end up going to the tax sale, but there are plenty of properties there where you wouldn't want to buy them because you wouldn't want to sink any money into them. A lot of them are limited by their value too. Even in good condition, their value is not high enough to justify how much it's going to cost, to fix it up.
Yeah.
So in other words, you don't want to throw, you wouldn't want to put $50,000 into a home that was only worth $50,000, and could never be worth more, or at least not worth more.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the reason why we're always going to either do an on-site evaluation, or we're going to find somebody to get current photos for us. So we're not going to ever buy a structured property sight unseen, except for maybe in some nice condo situations where seeing the front door of a condo is not going to make a huge difference, especially if it's in some type of building. But if we're talking about single family homes, commercial property, things like that, we're going to go ahead and get an on-site evaluation. Here's just an example of a photo that was taken from Google Maps Street View there on the left, where the house looks, pretty good. The yard's mowed, cars there, somebody's definitely living in the property. But the photo on the right, we can see, what has happened. You can see kind of the same fence and everything.
Yeah, you can even see the tree.
Yeah.
That giant tree that was up there is the one that had fallen over.
Yeah, and completely crashed in the roof. And so, this house is going to have serious damage. Really, it's going to need to be torn down and started over. And so, there was a lot of people at this auction that were there from Tulsa that were bidding on these type of properties with just basing the information on that we're looking here on the left. And maybe they went ahead and looked it up on Zillow, and it said it was worth 60 grand. And so, they were willing to go ahead and bid it up to 50, 60 grand.
Yeah. Well, it
kind of brings up the risk 5, emotional bidding, and why this is so important that you are an unemotional bidder.
Well, I think a lot of it is just about being informed. Emotional bidding is easy to do if you're ignorant of the numbers and stuff. And one of the things that we realized going into the auction is that a lot of times, you can be competing against people that don't know what they're doing. And when that happens, the problem with that is that, they don't know. If somebody hasn't attended a tax sale before, they don't know about what the kinds of prices you can get stuff at tax sales. So bidding up a property to them, bidding it up to market value, might seem like, if they want to win it, that's what they've got to do. But for somebody that goes to tax sales, that's crazy. We don't want to pay market value for anything. We're looking to pick stuff up at a fraction of what it's worth. And that was one of the problems, we ran into with a lot of the emotional bidding, that was happening in this sale. There was a whole lot of locals, and they were all bidding up the properties, highly heated and competitive bidding back and forth on everything that first day.
Yeah, well, it was a combination of being uninformed creates emotional bidding. This is the one risk that's attributed to us. This isn't something like a lien. This is something that we control. We can't control the crowd, but we can control ourselves. And anyone that's participated, even in some type of online auction where you really wanted something, or a charity auction, and you got wrapped up in the bidding, this is what the auctioneers strive on. In fact, with this particular auction that we attended, they brought in a professional auctioneer that kept extending it and was helping to cause a frenzy within these uninformed investors. And
Yeah,
so
I'm sure it made the county a ton.
I would say that at least 70 to 80% of the investors there were investors that really didn't understand what they were bidding on.
Yeah, well, it was really obvious. So most of them didn't know a lot about tax sales and how things worked. Most of them, it was their first time attending, or some of them I talked to, had attended before, but they still didn't know that much about tax sales.
Well, really, here's the traits of they haven't researched the risk beforehand. They haven't really understand or completely understand government liens. They haven't fully researched the property. They haven't, and I think in many cases, they haven't driven out and looked at these properties. Otherwise, you wouldn't be bidding a property up to near its market value if you drove by and saw a tree going through the house.
Yeah.
In fact, we tried to help and save people from making mistakes, but once you would kind of convince somebody, hey, this is a bad deal, turn around, next thing you know, they're bidding on another property and end up losing their money on something else.
Yeah. Well, for all the people that were there that knew what they were doing, it became really obvious what was happening, because they could see, craziness happening there with the bidding, and they could tell from it that people didn't know what they were bidding on either.
Yeah. Well, and really, the emotional bidder has not set preset limits. We know exactly how much we're willing to pay depending on the type of property. We're willing to go property under 10 grand, we want to get for 10 to 15%. Properties that are worth land that's worth 20 grand, we want to get for this. Homes that are worth 50 grand, we want to get for 30 cents on the dollar. If it's worth 100 grand, then we're willing to pay 40 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is, we've got an idea of exactly what we're willing to pay depending on the type of property.
Oh yeah, and I think that it's just really about being an unemotional buyer in there, which is a matter of doing your research and sticking to your guns. Being willing to let properties go when they go above the limit that you set. Which you have to do that a lot.
And it's hard to do. I mean, me and Shade attended another auction this year it was a local sale here in Utah, and the same thing kind of happened at this Tulsa sale, that there was a lot more, 3 or 4 times the amount of people than there had been in past years. And there was a lot of these, emotional bidders, uninformed bidders there at the auction. And so because of it, there was properties there bidding up for more than, or close to value. And we actually wanted to buy some property out there. It's recreational type property. We actually wanted to buy some property out there for our personal use, but we weren't going to pay market value for a tax sale property where we're still getting a clouded title in a sense. We're getting a tax deed. We're still going to have to go through quiet title if the property has significant value. And so, we're not getting a normal property at that point. So paying market value just doesn't make any financial sense.
Yeah, it's crazy. So can we talk about kind of what happened there throughout the sale here and how it worked and kind of what we did. This is an image here from the first day, and it's not really showing everybody. There's still tons of people off to the left. And I think this was before it started.
Yeah, this is actually, right when they were going over the rules.
Yeah, but so like we were saying, we downloaded the list and we set out to do any of the research that we could. Now at the same time, there were also a lot of redemptions that were happening all the time. So as properties were redeeming, we needed to be able to keep up with that. That was the downside of doing research before the sale is you're going to have a lot of properties that redeem, and you don't know which ones those are going to be, but you need to be able to stay on top of that actively so that you're not trying to do research on properties that are no longer available. And so, that was part of what we had to do with the list. But, once you have a customized list that you're working off of that makes sense to you, it makes following the auction and participating in the auction a lot easier.
Yeah, well, if we were just attending this auction ourselves, we probably would have targeted certain type of properties and kind of honed in our research and to a certain type of property. But we were actually going with a number of our coaching students, and so we wanted to research essentially every property that was available on the list to determine which ones were going to be good investments and which ones aren't. And so by using this Google Doc, we can include links back to information that as we were researching or sitting there during the auction, we could go down this list and click on the link and pull up the Google Street View, pull up the Zillow value, pull up our photos that we had taken, look up any government liens as we were going through. And so we could really kind of keep up with the auction, and it helped us stay prepared and knowing which properties we were bidding on.
Yeah. In fact, we had a kind of a color coordinating system here. So everything that was, shaded in green it was land. And, and then we had the other properties. Let me back up here one. And then we had, other properties. The improved properties were in a different color. We also changed the color on the properties that we had seen in person, and had images for, and you can see the links there. There's also an arrow pointing to the government liens, where we could, include information about, about the status of the property, in terms of liens. And then, you can see the links that we use directly there. So as we're going through it, it made it a lot easier to basically to know which properties you were going to bid on, and to stay informed with the sale happening.
Yeah, in fact, leave it here just for a second. I remember we knew, I kind of knew we were in trouble the first day when we got down to that property that's green there that has the red, the junk land. So you can see there on the list where we've highlighted properties in red, and the ink was red. And these were junk properties that we didn't even, we determined weren't even worth bidding on.
Yeah, and lots of reasons. They were, a lot of these were tiny side lots.
Yeah, well, that was only 1,900 square feet, and they were bidding competitively, way over whatever the assessed value was on these first properties. I was like, whoa, they're bidding on junk property and being competitive. What is this going to be like?
Oh yeah, that was when we were still trying to figure out exactly what was going on. We didn't know at that point that we didn't realize until that morning that it had been advertised.
Yeah, well, this, and there was, 3 times the registered bidders. There was over 1,000 bidders, or close to 1,000 bidders there that were registered for the sale. Plus there was people that came with those bidders as well. And so what the county had actually done is they had been advertising this on the local radio stations, which to us is kind of crazy because that's a huge expense, where we saw that as we were looking at the fees on the properties that we had to pay after, that they had been advertising this really hard within the Tulsa area. And that was part of the reason there were so many novice, new investors, uninformed investors attending the sale, because they heard a radio ad that said, hey, come buy properties for cheap, government tax sale, buy homes, land, and blasted them out. And then you had a totally professional auctioneer that was also, helping to get these high overbid prices.
Yeah. In fact, just got a comment from Brad, who said that I think Brad may be planning on participating in the St. Louis County tax sale next month, and it'll probably be kind of a similar Well,
I doubt
another
it. They
big
did it
auction.
on they advertised on the radio
Yeah,
station.
yeah, that's true. They probably won't advertise on the radio.
We've never seen this large of a crowd. I mean, they had this in this huge community center, and so you're talking about a massive, massive room, massive crowd. It goes back, we're looking at, it goes back and, twice as far than we're already looking, and so you're talking about a massive crowd, and even the regulars that we talked to said, man, there was, 250 people last year, 300 people total registered, and this auction also lasted 3 days.
Yeah. In fact, which was another, I guess in some ways, drawbacks, but also, there are advantages that you can find here. And after the first day, we decided, we were going to need to switch it up. I mean, everything was bidding up for so much that essentially, we didn't really have much of a choice. We're not bidding on anything at these prices. But what our hopes was that maybe as the auction went on, that some of the competition would go away. The numbers would become a little bit better, and that we might get a chance to actually bid on stuff.
Yeah, well, and there was a couple of homes that, that went just above what we were willing to go through. But we noticed that, most of these homes were bidding up, more than we were willing to pay, to the point where you're not going to be making money.
No, they were bidding up to like market, most of the homes.
Yeah. And so that's where we really decided to, see if we could pick up land property. We love land. In fact, a lot of times we'll prefer to buy land. And so we were looking for land to buy.
Yeah, which oftentimes land gets ignored in the sale, or at least it doesn't always get ignored, but certainly has a lot less eyes on it than a lot of other property. But in fact, it was actually a land deal that was the most profitable deal in the whole auction.
By far.
That we saw. In fact, I should have grabbed those slides.
And really what we did is we were pretty flexible. We didn't care what piece of land it was, as long as it had use and value, and we could pick it up for about 5 to 15% of its value, usually around 10 cents on the value. We were going to go ahead and pick it up, and so we bid it on every single property. And just I don't even think there was any rhyme or reason why sometimes we would win the property and many times it would go above our price. You could have two of the exact same lots next to each other, and maybe we were able to get ours for $1,200 where the other one sold for $3,000.
Yeah.
It was just interesting. There was it wasn't predictable like some of the auctions that we've seen before.
Well, we probably bid on 3 or 4 times as many as we won.
Oh, at least. Well, and if you're talking about our group bid on almost somebody in our group bid on almost every single lot that was available.
Yeah.
Or anyone that had use and value.
Yeah, that's true. But our little group did end up picking up a lot of properties though, and a lot of great deals. We were able to acquire a lot of land, and the majority of it really was picked up on the 3rd day.
Yeah, well, between the afternoon of the 2nd day is when we started getting properties, and then the morning of the 3rd day, that was kind of the best time in looking back of when we purchased, because near the end of the 3rd day, there started to be a little bit more competition at the end because people that hadn't bought anything want a property. And then after lunch at the 2nd day was where there was a little bit less crowd and we were able to pick up some properties. So, really we had to spend the whole 3 days there, but really it was an educational experience. Even though it didn't go as planned, it was still a total success because we had put in so much research beforehand that we knew every property that had value, which properties we shouldn't bid on and which ones we could, and we're just able to win the properties that we could get at the price that we wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of the properties that we won. We won maybe 5 different lots or so.
Yeah, 5 or 6 different lots. This one is a 1/3 an acre, nice residential lot in Sand Springs. Picked it up for about $3,000. Has a market value of around $24,000. So we ended up picking it about 12.5% of its value. In fact, this is a property that allows, things like trailers, manufactured homes. And so we're actually looking at maybe doing something with this property where we're not going to just be selling a piece of land. We may be making this into a potential rental.
Yeah. Yeah, this is just another property, and this is actually another one where we have the option to potentially put, a mobile home on it if we want.
Yeah, exactly. A nice big size lot, ended up picking up for 1900s. Market value on it is around 18,000. Picked it up for just over 10 cents on the dollar. And with these kind of properties, they're right there at the edge where if we can get somebody to do quiet title for cheap enough, let's say $1,500, it could make sense, even $2,000, to take some of these properties through quiet title. But then we also have the option of selling it to a neighbor, somebody like that, for a discounted price. So we're probably going to send out neighbor letters this week to the surrounding neighbors of this particular property and saying, hey, we just picked this up at the tax sale. We're going to be putting it on the market this week for 12 grand. If you're interested in it, we'll give it to you for 8 grand.
Yeah. This is another one of the properties here, just a fairly basic lot that we picked up for about 1,300. It's valued at about 12,000. Again, I don't know that any of these were flashy really in any way, but we were able to pick them all up for prices that will be profitable.
Yeah, well, we'd rather spend 10 grand and pick up I don't know how much the total is. Let's just say it's $100,000 worth of land versus spending 30 grand to buy a house that's valued at 10 grand, because there's so much work that needs to be done that it just doesn't make financial sense.
Yeah.
We're always going to look at the deals that can be profitable, and we're not going to be picky on the type of deal. And so, were these particular lots that we'd picked out that were our favorite lots? No, but they were lots that we were able to pick up at a good price that we know that we can turn around and either wholesale or in some of the cases go through quiet title, hire an attorney to go through it, and then at that point be able to sell the homes for full market value.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, let's see here. I think that's pretty much all we have.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Let me just switch out. Let's see. Oh, I do still have this up. You know what? Let's just show everybody real quick that one property. Yeah, just because I thought this was fascinating.
So this is the list that we had set up. You can see which properties, are in green, essentially being land. We can see the ones that are red. These are ones that we don't want to buy. So we left them on the list. We didn't delete them because we knew they would be going down this list in order. And so it let us know, where each one of the properties were, and we could, see. It was amazing to see what some of these properties ended up getting bid on that we had considered to be junk properties. In fact, I think there was only one property on the entire list that didn't get, and maybe 2 properties that didn't end up getting minimum bids.
Yeah, which is crazy. They normally get hundreds. But these were a couple of interesting properties right here. The opening bids on them were 280,000 and 43,000. But what we were looking at here is some commercial land. This was vacant 6.6 acres, and they're actually kind of right next to each other. But this was an example of a property here. The estimated market value on the property they had was at 3 million. 3.8 million for one of the properties and 600,000 for the other property, and the market could actually be higher than that. But what we found here, the guys that ended up buying this property, will make millions on this.
Yeah.
You know, because they ended up winning it at a pretty low price compared to what most things were bidding at. You know, they picked it up for what, doubled about what the opening bid was, about 600,000.
Yeah, I think between $700,000 for the big piece and 250 for the smaller piece.
Yeah, you kind of see how, you know, this piece right here is the smaller one, you know, and it kind of cuts in. Let me switch back over here to the satellite. And so, yeah, this big commercial chunk right here, though, both of the pieces together, you know, are what make this up. And you can see that, you know, they would be eligible for a lot of different things. You know, you could use them for, you know, I'm sure commercial business like this, or, you know, potentially something else.
Yeah, well, you know, it's right there where there's commercial property. There's also high-end condos, high-end townhomes, things like that. You know, it's right there on the river, across from the kind of the boardwalk or whatever it's called that goes along the river, the walkway. You know, we're talking about really kind of one of the nicer areas in town, kind of, you know,
Yeah.
really prime real estate. And so, you know, there was hundreds of people that lost money there at the auction because they ended up overpaying for property. But here was a deal that was picked up for really, I think, even a fraction of its value. I mean, they have it, you know, listed around 4 million plus the other ones at, you know, 600,000. So, you know, maybe like 4.5. Yeah, 4.5. I think it's probably worth, you know, at least $1 million or $2 million more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's worth it 5 million, they made, you know, they probably made 4 million bucks on, even if they were doing some kind of a quick flip on it, they probably could make a few million bucks on
Well,
this.
and it's a big money deal, you know. I mean, essentially, you're paying $50,000 a year in property taxes, you know, plus probably 60,000 by the time we're talking about both properties. So, you know, this is a larger money deal. But for those investors that do have larger money, do have more capital available, these are the type of deals that you can do and have high financial success. So, in fact, if we would have really realized that these properties would have sold for that, and if we weren't so focused on some of the structured properties, I think we would have tried to you know, find the capital to be able to invest in these two different properties, because really they were the steals of the auction.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, this was by far the best deal, and you know, the best purchase in the auction here was on those most valuable properties. So anyhow, you know, I think that is pretty much all that we really had here for this evening. You know, if any of you are interested in joining the membership program, you can do that at taxsalesupport.com. That's just a basic $39 a month. You can basically cancel anytime, and we do weekly trainings with this, so you get access to the lists and all the training.
Yeah, essentially we do a webinar like this every single week that you can attend and to participate in. Also, for the students that are participating in this webinar tonight, as we mentioned in the email, you guys are going to qualify for a strategy session with one of our coaches. So tomorrow what we'll do is we'll go ahead and send you out an email that you can go ahead and click on to schedule that strategy call with one of our coaches. So for those that do want that, we'll go ahead and send that email out to you, and you can go ahead and get registered. And really what we'll do during that is to find out what you're looking to do and see if we can get you pointed in the right direction.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us here, you know, this evening. Let's see here. Just gonna check to see. I didn't see any questions there.
I think that's it.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for joining us, and yeah, we'll be sure to do it again here in a few months.
Yeah. Thanks again, everyone.